So, today is April 20th, 2026, and I want to start by asking you, the listener, a pretty direct question.
Oh, diving right in. I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. What if I told you that the politician you just enthusiastically voted for in the last election—
Right, the one you had the yard sign for.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that one. What if I told you they are fundamentally playing the exact same game as the politician you voted against?
And you really can't stand that other one, usually.
Right. But not because they share the same personal beliefs or anything, or, because there's some grand, shadowy conspiracy going on in a back room somewhere.
No, nothing like that. It's structural.
It is. It's because they're both trapped in a system that is designed entirely to extract your loyalty.
Yeah, and usually at the direct cost of actual human lives, which is the really dark part.
It is. And the system disguises that extraction as this, grand moral crusade.
Always, every single time.
I mean, you watch the news, you see the shouting, the maneuvering, the endless legislative gridlock, and it just feels completely chaotic.
Right. It feels like everyone has lost their minds.
Exactly. But it's not chaotic at all. It's an incredibly predictable game with one singular underlying objective, and that is the acquisition of power.
Pure and simple. Power.
And the people sitting in the stands, you, me, our families, we're the ones paying the physical and psychological toll for this game.
Yeah, it's a fundamentally exhausting paradigm. I mean, it really is.
It really wears you down.
And what makes it so insidious, I think, is that classical politics tricks you into believing that the only way to fix the game is to, well, ensure your specific team wins more often.
Like if we just get our guy in there one more time, it'll be fixed.
Right. It demands your absolute loyalty to the jersey.
Yeah.
But the friction you're feeling, that deep-seated realization that something is just structurally wrong with how we govern human societies, it's entirely valid.
Because the solution isn't a better team, is it?
No, not at all. The solution requires stepping entirely outside the architecture of the stadium.
And that realization right there, that is the launchpad for our deep dive today.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. So we are looking at a framework today that attempts to just completely demolish that stadium.
Burn it to the ground, conceptually, I mean.
Right, conceptually. It's derived from a document called the Peaceful World Manifesto, version 1.0.
Which is quite the title.
It is. Now, we aren't going to get bogged down in the entirety of the manifesto today because, we want to keep things tight. We are taking a really laser-focused approach.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, so narrowing it down is smart.
So we're extracting just one concept from this text. Specifically, point 21. They call it metapolitics, or ethical expertise.
Metapolitics. It's a heavy word, but the core premise is actually beautifully radical.
It really is. It basically asks, what if we stopped treating politics as this messy ideological battleground and started treating it as a hard science?
Yeah, it's a wildly ambitious proposition. Point 21 essentially argues that politics should operate more like structural engineering.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Or algorithmic risk assessment, Like you don't build a suspension bridge based on progressive physics or conservative physics.
All right, because gravity doesn't vote.
Exactly. You build it based on objective, mathematically verifiable load-bearing principles, period.
So metapolitics attempts to take fundamental human ethics and apply them with that same cold, precise, data-driven rigor.
That's the goal, yes.
Okay, but before we get into the actual math and the mechanics of how you engineer policy like a bridge—
Because there are mechanics to this, yeah.
Right. We have to look at the ground we're building on first. Because the source material starts with a very aggressive demolition of the status quo.
It does not hold back.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Point 21 opens with this statement. We are not a party, but an ethical system of coordinates.
And that right there, that is the dividing line. The manifesto is formally declaring the death of the political party as a viable tool for human advancement.
Which sounds crazy at first, right? How do you even have politics without parties?
Yeah, I know. We can't even imagine it. But to understand why they say that, you have to look at the biological imperative of a political party.
Lay it on me.
In the classical model, a party is an organism. And what is the prime directive of any organism?
Survival.
Yeah.
Just staying alive and growing.
Exactly. Survival and growth. Therefore, the ultimate structural goal of a party is not to optimize human well-being.
Wait, really? Not even a little bit?
I mean, maybe as a byproduct. But the core goal is the acquisition and then the retention of power.
Because the logic they use goes something like, we can't help people if we aren't in charge.
Right.
Therefore, getting in charge is technically the most moral thing we can possibly do.
Exactly, the justification used. I hear it all the time. But notice the trap there.
The trap being that everything else becomes secondary.
Yeah, because the acquisition of power becomes the supreme overarching goal. Morals and ethics within a party framework become highly fluid.
Like they can just change them whenever it's convenient.
They become tradable commodities. I mean, think about it. A party will completely abandon a deeply held, historically defining moral stance if their internal polling data suggests that maintaining that stance will cost them a critical demographic of swing voters.
Oh, we've all seen that happen.
Yeah.
Like in the next election cycle, suddenly their core values are just totally different.
Right. They will defend a legally or morally dubious action taken by their own leadership while simultaneously launching a scorched earth campaign of condemnation if the exact same action is taken by the opposing party.
Wow. So the ethics are tethered entirely to the actor, not the action.
That's exactly it.
Like the moral weight of dropping a bomb or, I don't know, raising a tax depends entirely on the color of the tie worn by the person signing the order.
Precisely. It is entirely subjective. And that brings us to the ethical system of coordinates they propose as the replacement.
Right, the coordinate system, yeah.
Think about how a coordinate system works in geometry or navigation. It is composed of fixed axes, an X and a Y.
Okay, like a graph.
Yes. It evaluates trajectory and location entirely divorced from the identity of the object moving through it.
Oh, I see.
A GPS system doesn't care if the driver of the car is a saint or a criminal, you know.
It's totally impartial.
Right. It simply calculates that if the wheel is turned 30 degrees to the left at the current velocity, the vehicle will plummet off a cliff.
It just tells you the facts of your momentum.
Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back on this immediately because I know the listener's probably thinking this too.
Go for it.
A GPS works because it's mapping physical geography, right? Mountains don't move. Structural engineering works because gravity is an undisputed constant of the universe.
Sure.
But politics deals with human beings who are, let's be honest, messy, irrational, and driven by wildly different cultural values.
It's extremely messy.
So if you were building a political coordinate system, who gets to decide where the X and Y axes even go? Isn't the person drawing the map just injecting their own bias into the system?
That's the big question.
Like, how can you possibly have an objective, true north in politics?
That is the critical vulnerability of any new system, and it is exactly where the Manifesto drops its anchor. It has to establish an absolute, biologically verifiable constant.
A law of physics for human governance, basically.
Exactly. And the text defines it explicitly. Let me quote it. Priority of life stands above any geopolitical interests, party programs, and state borders.
Priority of life.
That is the true north. That is the foundational axis upon which every single other coordinate is plotted.
Okay, so the priority of life, meaning biological survival and the minimization of suffering, are the ultimate metrics here.
Yes.
But again, to play the skeptic for a second, every politician in history has claimed they are protecting life.
Oh, of course they have.
Even the ones launching massive wars claim they are doing it to protect the lives of their citizens from some imminent threat.
Right. It's always couched in defense.
So how does this metapolitical approach actually differ from the classical logic we've been using for centuries? Because this is kind of similar when you just say protect life.
It differs in how it defines the relationship between the human being and the state.
Oh, okay. Expand on that.
Well, classical political logic, and we are talking about the foundation of modern geopolitics here, stretching back to Machiavelli, back to the Treaty of Westphalia in the 1600s.
Deep roots.
Very deep. It treats the state itself as the highest priority, the nation, the empire, the republic. In this classical framework, the state is viewed almost as a living superorganism.
Wow. Like it has its own heartbeat.
Yes, it has a life of its own that must be preserved at all costs. Therefore, sacrificing individual human lives, whether they are your own soldiers or foreign civilians, to secure geopolitical interests or defend borders, is not just considered acceptable.
It's heroic.
Exactly. It is the highest virtue.
Right. It's the concept of dying for your country. The idea that a piece of land or a flag or a conceptual identity is somehow worth more than an actual heartbeat.
Yes, and metapolitics violently rejects this paradigm.
Violently rejects it. I love that phrasing.
It takes the classical pyramid of power and just flips it completely upside down.
Okay, so if the state isn't a superorganism, what is it?
Metapolitics asserts that the state is an administrative technology.
Administrative technology, like a DMV for everything.
Yeah. It is a tool invented by humans No different fundamentally than a water treatment plant or a highway system. It's designed to serve human life. It has absolutely no intrinsic value or moral weight of its own.
So, by placing the priority of life above the state, you're saying the tool must never be allowed to consume its creator.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's follow this logic to its breaking point, because I really want to test this.
Let's do it.
If you deprioritize borders, if you say that state sovereignty and geopolitical strength are secondary to human life, doesn't the system that protects people just collapse?
Oh, that's a classic fear, yeah.
Because, if a nation refuses to prioritize its border security because it requires violence, won't a more aggressive classical nation simply invade them?
And that would result in a massive loss of life.
Right. You can't just philosophize your way out of a totalitarian regime rolling tanks across your border.
No, you can't. And you're hitting on the exact friction point here. It's the trolley problem of national defense.
Yeah, so how does it handle that?
Well, Metapolitics doesn't advocate for pacifist suicide.
Oh, okay. That's an important distinction.
Very. It doesn't say, abolish the state and let the invaders win. What it does is completely change the calculus of why violence or defense is authorized in the first place.
Okay, let's look at borders then.
In classical politics, a border is sacred. It's almost holy.
Right.
If an enemy crosses a line drawn in the sand 100 years ago by some colonial power, classical logic dictates you must fight to reclaim that exact line, even if it costs 100,000 lives.
Because the line is the identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Metapolitics looks at a border and says, this is an administrative zip code.
An administrative zip code.
Yes. It has no pulse. It has no capacity for suffering.
So the defense isn't about the dirt.
Precisely. If a hostile force invades, the metapolitical justification for defense is not, we must protect the sanctity of the motherland. The justification is strictly, we must deploy defensive force to prevent the mass slaughter and subjugation of the breathing human beings currently living in this administrative zone.
Wow. It strips all the romanticism out of war.
It completely de-romanticizes it. And importantly, it heavily restricts offensive geopolitical maneuvers.
Oh, I bet. Like what?
Well, when a politician says we need to secure our geopolitical interests in the region.
Which usually means securing a shipping lane or controlling oil or maintaining a sphere of influence, right?
Exactly. Classical politics says, yes, bomb the foreign city to maintain our economic dominance. That's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, for the greater good of the empire.
But metapolitics runs the coordinates and says, economic dominance does not supersede the biological lives in that city. The action is mathematically invalid.
Wow. So it forces a profound humility onto the state.
Very profound.
The government has to constantly justify its existence by how effectively it protects life, not by how effectively it projects power.
Yes, exactly.
But this brings us back to the mechanics. We have established the philosophy, we've established the true north. But if I am a policymaker, or even just a voter, how do I actually measure this?
Right, because top is cheap.
Yeah. Politicians are absolute masters of disguising power grabs as life-saving measures. We can't just take their word for it. We need a diagnostic tool.
And this is where the Manifesto transitions from abstract philosophy into hard administrative science.
Okay, let's get into the science.
Point 21 introduces the PCIA framework. That stands for the Peace and Conflict Impact Assessment.
Peace and Conflict Impact Assessment, PCIA.
Okay. This is proposed as a mandatory, rigorously standardized audit for any political decision.
Okay, we need to spend significant time here because claiming you can mathematically audit human suffering is a massive leap.
It is a huge claim, I agree.
How does a PCIA actually function in the real world? What are the mechanics of this?
Well, to understand the mechanics of a PCIA, we should actually look at existing frameworks in other fields.
Like what?
Think about environmental protection. Decades ago, a city council could just look at a map, draw a line right through a vital wetland, and say, we are building an 8-lane highway here for economic growth.
Right, and nobody batted an eye. They didn't measure the collateral damage at all.
Exactly. But today, we mandate environmental impact assessment.
Oh, sure. EIAs.
Right. Before a single shovel hits the dirt, teams of scientists must quantify the impact on the water table, the displacement of local fauna, the projected air quality degradation. They produce a massive, data-driven report.
And if the environmental cost is too high, the project is either drastically modified or legally blocked.
Exactly. Now take that precise methodology and apply it to human conflict, social stability, and mortality.
Apply it to laws.
Yes. We currently allow politicians to pass multi-billion-dollar laws, enact sweeping economic policies, and deploy military assets based on rhetoric and, frankly, vibes.
Wow. Yeah, vibes. It's so true.
The PCIA demands a quantitative audit instead. It borrows heavily from fields like sociology, public health, and actuarial science.
Actuarial science, like insurance adjusters.
Yes. Actuaries already calculate risk and mortality every single day.
That's true. They literally put a price tag on risk.
In public health economics, we use metrics like QALYs, which stands for quality-adjusted life years, and DALYs, disability-adjusted life years.
Okay, so measuring the quality of life.
Right. These are mathematical formulas used to evaluate whether a new medical treatment is worth the cost by quantifying how many years of healthy, pain-free life it adds to a population.
So you're taking those medical and insurance metrics.
And the PCIA takes these deeply researched, mathematically rigorous tools and applies them directly to legislation.
Okay, let's put this to the test. Let's build a scenario. I want to see how the PCIA calculates a historically impossible political trolley problem.
Okay, I love a good scenario.
Let's look at foreign policy.
Yep.
Example 1, international economic sanctions.
A classic.
Let's say a hostile nation is developing a dangerous weapons program. Our government decides to implement comprehensive, crippling economic sanctions against them. Now, in classical politics, this is a massive win. The media cheers. It's seen as a tough, bloodless stance, right?
Oh, absolutely. They say, look, we're being strong, but no one is getting shot.
The politicians get a bump in the polls because they are doing something without deploying troops. So how does the PCIA audit this?
The PCIA completely ignores the domestic polling data and the political optics. It doesn't care.
It just looks at the data.
It sends in the auditors, sociologists, supply chain analysts, public health experts. They run the predictive models.
And what are they asking?
They ask, if we cut off this nation from the global banking system, what is the exact cascading effect on their domestic infrastructure? They don't look at the hostile government, they look at the biological population.
Right, because the government leaders probably aren't going to starve anyway.
Exactly. The leaders have their own reserves, so they run the numbers, and they find what?
Tell me.
They find that within 6 months, the inability to import goods will cause a collapse in the rival nation's healthcare supply chain.
Oh, man.
They calculate a specific data-backed shortage of basic medicines: insulin, antibiotics, anesthetics.
So people are going into surgery without anesthesia.
Yes. They map out the inflation of food prices, predicting a 40% increase in severe malnutrition among the civilian working class.
Wow.
They use historical data from previous sanctions to project the exact rise in infant mortality.
So they are essentially generating a spreadsheet of suffering.
Yes. They are calculating the conflict footprint of the policy. And the PCIA inevitably reveals a horrifying truth.
It's not bloodless at all.
The sanctions are not bloodless. They are a weapon of mass destruction played out in slow motion against civilians who have absolutely no control over their totalitarian government's weapons program.
And once that data is published, what happens? Under this metapolitical system, does the government just say, well, it's unfortunate, but we really have to stop their weapons program?
No. Under the absolute rule of the coordinate system, if the PCIA proves that a policy mathematically results in a net negative for human life,
like if the collateral mortality of the sanctions outweighs the speculative future danger of the weapons program.
yes, if that happens, the policy is fundamentally flagged as invalid.
Just flat out invalid.
It violates the true north. The government is legally and ethically blocked from implementing broad sanctions.
So what do they do instead?
They are forced to return to the drawing board to engineer a highly targeted surgical intervention that impacts only the political and military leadership without starving the general population.
That is incredible. It entirely removes the political cover.
Completely.
I mean, a politician can no longer stand at a podium and claim they are promoting global peace when the PCIA score attached to their bill clearly shows it will cause a 20% spike in civilian starvation.
Right. It's an enforced transparency that destroys the illusion of the necessary evil.
It strips the rhetoric right from the action.
It does.
Okay, let's bring this down from the global stage to a micro level. Because I want to do a domestic example now.
Sure, let's bring it home.
I want to understand how a PCIA measures psychological or social conflict, not just raw mortality rates like starvation.
That's a really important distinction, yeah.
Let's imagine a local city mayor. They're running for re-election, and they promise a massive party program of urban renewal.
Oh, the classic urban renewal promise.
Right. So they plan to use eminent domain to bulldoze a sprawling, low-income, historically marginalized neighborhood near the city center.
Okay.
And they want to replace it with a state-of-the-art, multi-billion-dollar tech park and luxury housing.
Very common scenario. Under classical political logic, the mayor defends this by pointing to the macroeconomic indicators, right?
Exactly. They show the projected GDP growth for the city. They point to the new high-paying jobs for developers and tech workers.
They show the massive increase in property tax revenue, because the classical system measures the success of a society by its economic throughput.
Right. More money means better city. But then the PCIA is triggered for the zoning change. What happens?
The PCIA auditors step in, and they use a completely different set of metrics. They are not looking at GDP.
What are they looking at?
They're looking at social cohesion indices and displacement statistics. They analyze the impact of forced relocation. They ask, where do these low-income residents actually go?
And the data probably shows they will be pushed into underfunded distant suburbs.
Exactly, which means longer commutes.
Loss of access to existing public transit.
Right. Moving away from affordable fresh food markets to food deserts.
Wow. Yeah, so it's not just moving houses, it's a whole lifestyle degradation.
And the public health actuaries can calculate the corresponding drop in life expectancy due to that.
Due to just moving.
Due to the increased stress, poorer diet, and loss of preventative health care access. It's a measurable drop.
That's crazy.
Furthermore, the sociologists measure the destruction of established community support networks.
Like what, exactly?
Like informal childcare, neighbors watching out for each other, multi-generational living arrangements that keep the elderly out of care facilities.
Oh, right. You bulldoze the neighborhood, you bulldoze all those invisible support systems.
Exactly. They run predictive models showing that destroying this social fabric will plant the seeds for future civil unrest, exacerbate generational poverty, and correlate with a measurable spike in local crime rates and addiction over the next decade.
So the PCIA acts as a long-term stress test.
A very rigorous one.
It looks past the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the tech park and calculates the human wreckage 10 years down the line.
Yes.
And if the assessment shows that the social destruction outweighs the economic benefit,
then the project fails the coordinates.
it just fails.
It is exposed not as a renewal project, but as a predatory extraction of wealth at the expense of human stability.
So the mayor can't do it.
Right. The mayor is forced to pivot. They must find a way to stimulate the economy that inherently protects and elevates the existing population rather than erasing them.
Okay, this is a beautiful, mathematically sound vision for governance. I really mean that.
It's very compelling.
If we could force every politician to staple a PCIA report to every piece of legislation, the world would change overnight.
Literally overnight.
But here is the major hurdle, and I know you know what I'm going to say.
Go on.
The manifesto isn't just written for world leaders, is it?
No, it's not.
It's written for the public. It proposes this as a way of life.
A completely new way of engaging with the world.
Well, how does the person listening to this deep dive right now, someone driving to work or walking their dog, actually use this?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because if I'm not a public health actuary, and I don't have access to a team of sociologists running Monte Carlo simulations on supply chains in my basement.
Which most of us don't, yeah.
Right. How do I become an everyday metapolitician?
This is the most vital transition in the entire concept. We are moving from institutional mechanics to personal psychology here.
Okay, psychology.
You do not need a supercomputer to utilize the metapolitical framework.
That's a relief.
The PCIA, at its core, is a lens. It is a cognitive filter.
A filter for what?
It is a way of actively parsing the information you consume and fundamentally changing the way you interact with your community.
Okay, let's build a toolkit for the listener.
Yeah.
Because this requires unlearning a lifetime of conditioning, honestly.
It really does. It's hard work.
So how do I use this when I'm just consuming information? Say I turn on the television tonight and there is a high-stakes political debate between two presidential candidates.
Okay, great scenario.
How do I apply the coordinate system in real time while watching that?
Well, you have to become intensely aware of the questions your brain is automatically asking and consciously override them.
What do you mean by automatic questions?
We have been conditioned by media and classical politics to watch a debate as if it were a reality TV show or like gladiatorial combat.
Oh, for sure. Who had the best zinger?
Exactly. As you watch, your subconscious is asking, who looks more confident? Who had the best counterattack? Did my candidate successfully humiliate the other candidate?
Who is winning the narrative?
Right. It's all about dominance and aesthetics. We are judging the performance of the actor, not the mechanics of the policy.
So how do I stop doing that?
To utilize the metapolitical lens, you must silence those questions. You have to intentionally separate the aesthetics of politics from the mechanics of policy.
Okay, separate aesthetics from mechanics.
Yes. When candidate A, who belongs to the party you absolutely despise, proposes a healthcare reform, and candidate B, who you normally support, proposes a border policy,
Okay.
you must strip away their names, their party affiliations, and their tone of voice.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It is. But you essentially run a rapid internal PCIA. You ask yourself the core coordinate question. Regardless of who is speaking, does the mechanism of this specific policy objectively protect human life, or does it inherently increase the potential for conflict, marginalization, and harm?
So if my preferred candidate gives a sweeping, beautifully articulated, emotionally resonant speech about securing our future,
Right, great rhetoric.
but the actual mechanical policy involves slashing food assistance for single mothers to balance a budget deficit
Then your internal PCIA immediately flags it as toxic.
because it mathematically harms life.
Yes. You recognize that despite the brilliant rhetoric and the comfortable feeling of supporting your team, the mathematical trajectory of the policy leads to increased suffering.
You learn to read the GPS trajectory instead of listening to the charismatic backseat drover.
I love that analogy. Yes, exactly.
I can see how that changes the way you vote. It's powerful.
Very powerful.
But let's take it a step further. Let's look at local community action. Because most people don't interact with presidents, they interact with their neighbors.
That's where the real work happens.
Let's say our listener goes to a contentious local school board meeting or a neighborhood zoning dispute.
Oh, this can get vicious.
They are often incredibly toxic. It's micro-tribalism. It's neighbors screaming at neighbors. How does this metapolitical lens actually de-escalate a room like that?
By fundamentally changing the vocabulary of the room.
Changing the vocabulary. How?
In those local disputes, the battle lines are drawn instantly. It's the greedy developers versus the anti-progress homeowners.
Right.
Or the radical teachers versus the oppressive parents.
Right. Everyone has a label. Everyone is trying to score a victory for their faction.
The everyday metapolitician steps into that room and refuses to engage in the factional warfare. You become the anchor.
The anchor, I like that.
You stand up at the microphone and you don't attack anyone's character. You don't question anyone's motives.
You just demand the coordinates.
Yes, you relentlessly steer the collective focus back to the objective impact. You ask, before we vote on this zoning change, what is our impact assessment?
Just bringing it back to the data.
Right. Which of these three proposals objectively causes the least amount of harm to the most vulnerable members of our community? Which option empirically ensures the physical safety of the children walking to the school? Which option preserves the social cohesion of this specific block?
That is a fascinating psychological tactic. It's incredibly disarming.
It really is, because it's not what they're expecting.
When someone expects you to yell at them, and instead you calmly ask for data regarding human well-being, it short-circuits the tribal anger.
You are forcing everyone to look at the map rather than fighting over who gets to hold the steering wheel.
It introduces a localized version of the scientific method into a purely emotional arena.
Beautifully said.
I see the power in that. I really do. But I have to bring us back to reality here, because we are dancing around the massive elephant-sized psychological barrier in the room.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant.
This sounds deeply liberating on paper.
It does.
But in practice, isn't this requesting an almost agonizing cognitive shift from the listener?
Yes, it is.
I mean, you are asking people to be willing to call out their own political allies, their own friends, and their own favored candidates if their policies fail this internal PCIA test.
I am. And it is arguably the most difficult aspect of adopting this framework.
Because human beings are biologically wired for tribalism.
We are a deeply tribal species.
Evolutionary psychology tells us that for hundreds of thousands of years, if you disagreed with your tribe, you were exiled to the wilderness to die.
It was a literal death sentence.
We have a deep neurological need to belong to an in-group. It feels safe. It provides a shared reality.
It's comforting.
So when you adopt this coordinate system, you have to give up the warm, fuzzy comfort of unquestioning tribal belonging. You become politically homeless.
You do.
If you stand up at a dinner party and tell your progressive friends that their favored policy actually has a massive conflict footprint.
Or you tell your conservative friends that their economic plan mathematically destroys lives.
Right. You're going to be very unpopular very quickly.
The isolation you're describing is very real. The friction of independent, objective thought against the grain of groupthink is immense.
It takes guts.
It requires profound intellectual courage to sever your identity from a political brand. But we have to look at the trade-off here.
Okay, what is the trade-off?
Yeah.
What are you actually sacrificing and what are you gaining?
Well, you said it yourself. You're sacrificing your team.
I'm sacrificing my team. What am I gaining?
You are gaining the cessation of internal cognitive dissonance.
Oh, that's interesting. Explain that.
Think about the psychological toll of classical political loyalty. When you rely on a party to dictate your morality, you live in a constant, exhausting state of low-level anxiety.
Because you never know what they're going to do next.
Because parties inevitably do terrible things to retain power. It's what they do. And when your team does something unethical, you are forced to perform mental gymnastics to justify it.
Right. You have to lie to yourself.
You do. You have to ignore the suffering your side causes while magnifying the suffering the other side causes. It rots your intellectual integrity over time.
That is a brilliant point. The mental energy required to constantly defend hypocrisy is just draining.
It's exhausting.
You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, hoping your preferred politician doesn't say something that forces you to compromise your own values to defend them.
But when you adopt the metapolitical coordinate system, that anxiety evaporates.
It just goes away.
It does. You trade the stress of defending political hypocrisy for the profound peace of an unshakable ethical true north.
Wow.
You never have to contort your logic to defend a politician again. Ever.
That's a relief, honestly.
If they propose a good policy that protects life, you support the policy. If they propose a bad policy that harms life, you reject the policy. Your identity is no longer tied to their performance.
Their identity is tied to the coordinates.
Yes.
It shifts the entire burden of proof. I don't have to prove my loyalty to a party. The policy has to prove its mathematical worth to human life.
Exactly.
That is an incredibly empowering realization.
Yeah.
I don't need a pundit on a news network to tell me how I should feel about a new law. I have the PCIA framework.
You run the numbers yourself.
Does it serve biological life, or does it extract life to serve state power? It is a binary, objective diagnostic applied to a vastly complex world.
It allows you to navigate the complexity without losing your humanity.
Man, this has been a massive, paradigm-shifting deep dive. We have covered an immense amount of philosophical and practical ground today.
We really have. It's a lot to take in.
Let me try to synthesize the journey we've taken here, just to pull it all together.
Sounds good.
We started by diagnosing the disease. The classical political model, where the survival of the party and the state supersedes all other morality.
Right, the system that treats us like resources.
We examine how this system inherently breeds hypocrisy and conflict.
The stadium of endless toxic competition.
Then we introduced the cure outlined in point 21, metapolitics. The complete abandonment of party loyalty in favor of a rigid mathematical system of ethical coordinates.
Which replaces the actor with the action.
Right. We established the absolute true north of this system, which is the uncompromising priority of life, which dictates that human beings hold intrinsic value far above arbitrary borders, historical geopolitical claims, or sweeping party programs.
We flipped the pyramid, making the state a servant of the population, rather than the population a resource for the state.
And crucially, we didn't just leave it at philosophy. We explored the mechanics of the PCIA, the Peace and Conflict Impact Assessment.
The toolkit.
We looked at how borrowing actuarial science and sociological data can mathematically expose the hidden suffering, the conflict footprint of both international sanctions and local urban development.
Removing the necessary evil excuse forever.
And finally, we discussed the deep psychological courage required to become an everyday metapolitician, the willingness to face the friction of abandoning your tribe in exchange for the absolute clarity of an objective moral compass.
You've captured the mechanics and the philosophy perfectly. It is a total reconstruction of how we interact with authority.
I feel like I'm looking at the news completely differently already.
But before we conclude, I want to leave the listener with a final thought experiment.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. Where are we taking this?
A way to project this framework into the immediate future. We've focused heavily on how you, as an individual, can use this lens. But I want you to imagine the systemic shockwave if this became the global standard.
Okay, I'm imagining it.
Imagine if, Starting tomorrow morning, a new constitutional amendment was adopted globally.
Globally, okay.
Every single politician, from a city council member to a head of state, is now legally required to publish a fully independent, peer-reviewed peace and conflict impact assessment alongside every single piece of legislation they draft.
Okay, yeah.
And the absolute rule of law dictates that any policy scoring a net negative for human life,
Any policy
where the collateral damage to social stability and biological survival outweighs the economic or geopolitical gain, is automatically, unceremoniously vetoed.
just wiped off the table before it even reaches a vote.
Exactly. Now ask yourself, how much of our current global infrastructure would instantly evaporate?
Oh my God.
How many trillion-dollar military budgets, how many broad-spectrum economic sanctions, how many predatory zoning laws, and how many restrictive border policies would simply disappear from the earth by tomorrow afternoon?
Almost all of them, I bet.
The entire landscape of global power would be forcefully, rapidly redesigned to prioritize human flourishing over institutional dominance.
It's a staggering visualization.
Yeah.
I mean, it reveals just how much of our current world is built on the accepted, normalized extraction of human well-being.
It does. It really exposes the foundation. And while we wait for the world's governments to adopt that standard, you can adopt it yourself.
Start small.
As you wake up and read tomorrow's headlines, try running that internal PCIA on the first major news story you see.
Just on your phone over coffee.
Exactly. Strip away the party names. Look at the mechanics. You will be astounded at how sharply and how differently the world comes into focus when you finally take off the jersey of your political team and start reading the coordinates.
A completely different world built on a foundation of math and profound empathy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. To the listener, take this toolkit, brace yourself for the friction, and start mapping out your own coordinates.